Welcome to Washington and the Hill here on NewsNation. All the big 2025 players in the headlines tonight. Trump, Putin, Xi, Musk. So why is KJP top of the fold as well? What Joe Biden's former press secretary is saying tonight, including ditching the Democratic Party, plus threats from China, an arrest involving a biological pathogen, how the FBI nabbed a scholar from one of the country's biggest universities. Also tonight, factories in focus. The man who represents the nation's biggest manufacturers, here with us tonight on what has actually happened since quote-unquote Liberation Day. But first tonight, here from the Hill, kill the bill. That is the new demand from Elon Musk this evening, leaving some Republicans puzzled.
Elon and I left on a great note. We were texting one another, happy texts, Monday. And then yesterday, 24 hours later, he does a 180 and he comes out and opposes the bill. And it surprised me, frankly. And I don't take it personal. We don't take it personal.
But that's not the only challenge that is facing President Trump this evening. Hello, good evening. Thanks for being with us tonight here on the Hill. I'm Blake Berman. President Trump firing off an overnight post saying China's Xi Jinping is hard to make a deal with. He then revealed a phone call as well with Vladimir Putin this morning. And Putin made it clear that the attacks on Ukraine aren't going to stop anytime soon. Joe Khalil in a moment on how the leader of the Republican Party is now handling this Musk moment. But we begin with our Robert Sherman live at the White House on the foreign foes that the president continues to deal with this evening. Robert?
Hey there, Blake. And the president speaking by phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin today. In terms of how it went, well, here's a big takeaway. The president saying that it was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace. President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent attack on the airfields. That attack the president referring to is a drone operation carried out by the Ukrainians, hitting Russian aircraft thousands of miles away from Ukrainian soil. The president remains hopeful a peace deal can be struck. The Russians are vowing to retaliate. The president's own special envoy, Keith Kellogg, fearing that the risk of escalation is rising. Blake?
Robert, there's also the conversation between the Chinese and the U.S. and what President Trump had to say about that this morning.
Yeah, right. The White House says that there will be a conversation between Presidents Trump and Xi this week, but the president saying this today, quote, "I like President Xi of China, always have and always will, but he's very tough, extremely hard to make a deal with." That was a Truth Social the president sent out earlier today. There it is on your screen right now. The president does want to get a trade deal done and cut into this trade deficit the U.S. has with China. But so far, both countries are digging in, accusing the other of trade violations and holding out. Blake?
Robert Sherman live on the North Lawn tonight. Robert, thank you. And then there's up on Capitol Hill. The White House now has a new dilemma. How to get Elon Musk to stop trashing the president's key legislative item. Musk, who left his role as a special government employee just last week, posting today on his platform that lawmakers should kill the bill. Our Joe K live tonight up on the Hill. Joe?
Yeah, and I can tell you that's not going to happen, but it's something they've got to contend with. For the second day in a row now, Senate Republicans have been meeting behind closed doors, trying to hammer out this big, beautiful bill. We were told today they made some incremental progress from senators afterwards, some smaller things they handled. The bigger questions like, can they cut more spending? Can they avoid adding to the deficit? That still needs to be worked out. One senator told me, look, we got like 53 guys and like 75 different viewpoints. So obviously that's going to be a challenge for them. Elon Musk is the elephant in the room. Listen to Speaker Mike Johnson this morning about this.
I talk to President Trump, all the time, multiple times a day. Obviously, we've talked about this. As you know, he's not delighted that Elon did a 180 on that. But look, I don't know what happened in 24 hours. Everybody can draw their own conclusions about that, okay? But I look forward to talking to my friend about it again, and I'm not upset about it.
So, Blake, we were asking senators today, does what Musk says matter? Many of them came out of the meeting today, said, actually, no, they don't think so. They're in the room doing the work. They're policymakers, and they said a lot of it is just noise.
All right, our Joe Khalil live tonight up on Capitol Hill, the opposite of a golf voice there, trying to Talk over the music in the background, Joe. Thank you. All right, so here's a breakdown of what is in the big, beautiful bill. It extends, for example, the 2017 Trump tax cuts, raises the cap on state and local tax deductions, known as SALT. It eliminates taxes on tips for many, a major campaign promise of the president, and makes major changes as well to Medicaid. But the bill is more than 1,000 pages long. There's a lot in there, as you might imagine. Here's just a few things we saw that you might not have heard about in other places. For example, it introduces a new fee for asylum seekers. It deregulates gun silencers, puts funding towards America's 250th anniversary celebration next year. It limits certain tax breaks for sports team owners and prevents states from regulating AI for 10 years. The last one there, if you were watching us last night here on the Hill, you know that caught the eye of the Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who voted for the bill when it passed the House, but now wants that AI provision removed.
I find it so problematic that I'm willing to come forward and admit that those are 2 pages that I didn't read, because I never want to see a situation where state rights are stripped away. I think we have to protect states' rights to be able to regulate and make laws that they need to make for their states.
All this, of course, as President Trump meets with Republican senators who, depending on sort of which senator you talk to and whatever their issue is, some of them are worried about the total cost of the bill and its potential impact on the national debt. Lots out there on this day. Mark Short joining me now, former Chief of Staff to Vice President Mike Pence, and Elizabeth Pipko is the former spokeswoman over at the RNC. Hello to you both. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Those are 3 big challenges before the president, right? You've got all of a sudden this Musk moment. You've got China and you got Russia. Let's start with the big, beautiful bill. You were the one or one of the very big key players in the first tax bill in 2017. Elon Musk all of a sudden sort of inserting himself into this. Joe K sort of hit on this, Mark. Does that matter at the end of the day?
I think it matters, but I don't think it's consequential. I think because we're now having negative, news cycles continuing to talk about this. But I think we all need to take a breath and recognize when you have a bill that's this large, it's not going to be perfect. But the reality is that the alternative of having a $4.5 trillion increase on the American people is a very negative consequence. And so I think there's a lot to be supportive.
You're talking about if the bill isn't passed and then taxes
There's
go
a lot to be supportive. And I think it's a little bit rich for a guy who made his fortune on the back of American taxpayers with subsidies to electric vehicles and direct payments from the federal government for his space initiatives to all of a sudden say the bill has too much pork in it.
So there you go. You're a little leery of Musk, right? And I guess this is sort of the new. Is this a new friction within the Republican Party?
No, I think that Musk did a great service with Doge. I think it's great to find spending cuts, but at the same time, I think it's hard for him to be in a position of saying the bill has too much pork when his whole fortune has been created off the backs of American taxpayers.
This came out of nowhere. I don't know if it came out of nowhere, but just sort of here. I mean, he was there in the White House getting the key to the White House just a handful of days ago, and now you got Mike Johnson being like, what happened in the last 24 hours?
Right. I don't think this means he wouldn't still get a key to the White House, right? People disagree. Elon Musk is not a lifelong Republican. I don't even know if he's a Republican right now. So his opinion is not that relevant on this. At the same time, it's also nice.
You don't think it's relevant?
I don't think it's relevant to Donald Trump or most Republicans. I think people are curious what's going on in his mind because he's been a key player for the last, couple of months.
No threat to primaries? Because he's basically saying out there, look, if you don't do certain things, we're coming after you in 2026.
Let's not forget, before all of this happened, before Donald Trump won in November, he was not really involved and decided, look what is on the ballot, look what I have to do with this decision, and decided to obviously get behind Donald Trump. So the fact is, when the primaries come around, then he has to make a decision. I'm pretty confident he's going to back Donald Trump and Republicans anyway.
We learned this morning the president's schedule was basically kind of wide open, and I was wondering what's going on. This has been a couple days now, and Elizabeth, now we know he was talking to Vladimir Putin for about an hour and 15 minutes or so. President Trump says Putin made it very clear. Russia is not going to stop bombing Ukraine anytime soon. He said it was a phone call about attacks on both sides. It was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace. Where does Trump go from here now? Because he talked about solving this thing on day one.
He did. Look, I think when it comes to Donald Trump, he has to answer for a 3-year mess. The fact is that Donald Trump was there when Putin initially invaded. I don't think what happened would have happened. I think in April of 2022, there would have been a chance for America, Donald Trump, to not get in the way of the agreement that was supposed to be made. The war would not have continued on, and now we're in this mess. The fact is Donald Trump isn't called an isolationist. He's not. He's talking to Putin. He's talking to everyone involved. He has an envoy on the scene. The fact is he wants to do whatever it takes for peace, but with that comes serious challenges.
Do you think that Trump thought he would have these, as Elizabeth said, serious challenges right now with Putin? Or do you think he thought he would have had this solved and sort of what's the next move here?
I think he knew that the challenge was. I think he probably assumed he would solve it faster. But, you know, I long for the days that Republicans actually had a position to say that when a former KGB dictator invades a country, slaughters women and children, steals children, brings them back across country lines, that your position would be to say, let's allow Ukraine to defend itself. That's the fastest way to peace.
So that's the position of your old boss, Mike Pence, President Trump's, of course.
in the first Trump administration, Blake. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest.
Putin doesn't want peace. Putin wants Ukraine. The time has come for President Trump and the U.S. Senate to enact harsh sanctions on Russia and increase military support for Ukraine.
Let's keep in mind, it was the policy of the first administration. It was the one that actually prevented Nord Stream 2. It was the Trump administration that actually took out 100 Russian mercenaries in Syria when they crossed the red line. The president of the first administration was very tough on Russia. And so I welcome the chance to actually return to those same policies that I think contained Russia.
Do you think he needs to return to what Mike Pence is saying there?
I don't. I think the fact is Joe Biden, for 3 years, funded this war, and look what happened. There is no way that continuing to fund this war is proven to actually end anything. The fact is people don't want to talk about it. Look at the effort going on to keep Iran from a nuclear weapon. Russia has a nuclear arsenal bigger than really anyone out there except for us. So if we do end up in World War III, as Donald Trump calls it, who has to stop it? The United States of America.
All right. The Biden administration tied the hands of Ukraine with the weapons that were provided. They never allowed them the freedom to actually defend themselves. Let's go back to returning to that policy like it was in the first Trump administration.
So if that's Musk and then that's Russia, let me end here with China, because the president said today, by the way, and I'm not equating all these, but these are three of the big ones before him. He said he had a phone call or he said she rather is very tough and he is extremely hard to make a deal with. I keep reminding people that from the very first tariff in 2018 to the phase 1 trade deal at the end of 2019. That was 20 months, Mark. And I'm just wondering here if Trump is sort of starting to remind the American people, you know what, this could take a while with China.
I think that's okay. I think the American people can be supportive of tariffs against China because I think they are our nation's greatest adversary today. I think that's what the president did well in the first administration, was rallying the world to focus on China. I think the challenge is when you assess tariffs across the globe universally, to friend and foe alike, it's harder now to rally our allies against China, number one. And number two, I think that for China, what they've seen is this when you have this tariff policy universally and the bond markets react as they did, I think Xi probably feels like he can wait this out because he knows that there'll be a negative consequence in the market.
Is that what he's doing here?
You know, I can't speak for him, obviously, but
I don't
want to.
No, I know.
No, but the fact is we have a lot of issues with China, right? We're not just talking on tariffs. We're talking about the threat that is China, the fact that you're talking about Ukraine, the fact that most of our defense, let's say our resources that were spent being given to Zelensky in Ukraine are now missing, and we don't have them to support what's going on in China to try to protect Taiwan, to get involved. The fact is it's a very complicated situation. Donald Trump was not put in an easy spot, but I think if anyone...
He did bring the tariff issue, though, onto himself.
100%. He's talked about it for how many, 40, 50 years that he was going to, and the fact is it takes some time to clean up the last mess and fix the future.
Two different voices within the party of power right now. Elizabeth, Mark, see you both later in the show. Appreciate it. Still to come tonight. Here on the Hill, manufacturing in this country, where does it stand right now? 2 months after Liberation Day, as the president called it. The man who speaks for the nation's top manufacturers. Live with us tonight here on the Hill. Plus, they say don't mess with Texas. Well, tonight, the Lone Star State is sending a strong message to U.S. adversaries. We'll explain what's going on down there. And did you see this one today? She was once the press secretary for the former president. So why is Karine Jean-Pierre now saying she's done with the Democratic Party? Welcome to Washington. I thank you for being with us tonight. I'm Blake Berman. You're watching The Hill. We're back in 4 minutes. See you on the other side. On NewsNation, did we just see a potential red flag for the job market? The payroll firm ADP is reporting that private sector Employment only added 37,000 new jobs in May. Economists had predicted a much higher number, 110,000. It's the lowest level since March of 2023. And if you look at this chart, here it continues a downward trend that started late last year. Now, one of the big goals of President Trump's tariffs is to bring back American jobs, especially manufacturing jobs. Right now, nearly 13 million people are employed in manufacturing, according to the National Association of Manufacturers. The sector contributed nearly $3 trillion to the country's GDP last year. That's why we wanted to hear from Jay Timmons tonight. He is the president and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. It's been roughly 2 months since quote-unquote Liberation Day, and Jay Timmons is back with us now. Hello, sir.
Good to see you.
Thanks for being in tonight. I kind of wanted to just sort of a status checkup from you on where things stand, because we got to read today on sort of manufacturing and where it is, but I wanted to show you a 5-year chart. And it shows sort of how COVID, there was a manufacturing boom, right? And then that came down, and there was a pickup at the start. Here it is, of the Trump administration, but it's dropped. And so when you look at the 5-year picture, it's that. What are you seeing, I guess, over the last 60 days or so, given the president's policies?
Yeah, I think people are really looking at the future, and they're trying to be steady at this point, to be honest. But there is caution. There's no doubt about that. Okay. You mentioned job openings, or the number of jobs that were created. We have 382,000 open jobs in manufacturing. So we're hiring. Okay. And we're going to need more and more people, especially as some of these goals are realized that the president has set for manufacturing.
How come you can't fill them?
Well,
what's the challenge?
There's a lot of reasons that number has been pretty consistent over the last several years, and the challenge is we really have to have more technical training for so many young people and folks that want to make a transition in their career.
Hoping you could square this for me, because we keep hearing from, or we heard, I should say, from Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, that the economy is, in his view, doing just fine. Watch.
We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments.
He said the economy is doing in just fine shape, but then we see the president with a post out overnight saying, you know what, Xi Jinping is hard to deal with. Yeah. So if the economy's fine now, but this big question about China still overhangs, how does that impact the manufacturing world and what you're hearing and seeing from companies?
Well, look, I think uncertainty can be a killer of economic progress, and we have uncertainty right now. In fact, we released our quarterly outlook survey for the second quarter. We had a pretty precipitous drop in manufacturing optimism from 70 points in the first quarter to 55 points in the second quarter. But look, here's the good news, right?
Yep.
We could talk all day about
I want the good news, so give it to me.
The good news is we have a president that is laser focused on growing manufacturing in the United States. And he's doing that in a couple of ways. He's providing some carrots. If you look at the tax bill, I mean, we are working really hard to get that through. That's especially important for small manufacturers. It's especially important to preserve 6 million jobs that'll be lost if that bill doesn't get passed. He's doing it in the regulatory space, making sure that regulations are rebalanced for us to be able to compete more successfully around the world. They're focusing on workforce development through the Department of Labor, which is great for manufacturing to fill those jobs we talked about. And then there's a stick. And the stick are the tariffs. And honestly, manufacturers, that's the one thing I always hear from manufacturers is, where are we going with this? We have a little over a month to get 89 trade agreements done. But here's the carrot that is possible with that. We're going to be presenting to the administration tomorrow the manufacturing investment accelerator.
So tell me about that, because you are going to the White House, or at least presenting this to them. What are you trying to get out of them? What is it? What are you trying to get out of them?
So we want to help the president attract investment here to the United States, the same goals that he has. We want to invest and grow jobs here. And this program has 3 main components. The first is a speed pass, if you will, to provide a license for duty-free treatment of critical inputs. So think critical minerals. You had a segment on that in the last half hour, right? We can't get those here. We don't mine those here. We got to get them here. We don't want them to be more expensive. Machinery that goes on a shop floor for a new facility that you're building. If we don't make it here, let's get it in here duty-free. And then the second component is really an investment accelerator rebate. If something has to be tariffed, then if it is used to grow manufacturing investment in the United States, let's have a rebate.
Okay.
The third component is a quarterly dialogue with administration officials to make sure that this is all going the way that they want it to go. Can you imagine President Trump in one of those meetings saying, I'd actually love this. We need more investment in the United States, and being able to have that back and forth about this is what is working and this is maybe where we need a little bit more.
All right, let us know what happens. Letting the White House know.
We're pretty excited.
You are excited.
Yeah.
I can tell. Jay Timmons, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon. Again, a checkup. Let's do this again in a month or so.
You got it.
All right, still much more ahead here on the Hill. A major smuggling bust. We're not talking about drugs here, though. How two foreigners tried to sneak a deadly biological pathogen into the U.S. Plus, the U.S. and China currently in the trade standoff, but a different battle is taking place right, potentially, in your backyard. On the other side. Welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. 6:30 here on the East Coast and in Washington. And tonight there are new threats front and center from China. The FBI just arrested a couple with ties, it says, to the Chinese Communist Party, arrested for allegedly smuggling a deadly biopathogen called Fusarium graminearum into the U.S. The U.S. Attorney's Office says they tried to smuggle it through Detroit's main airport so they could conduct research on it at a lab at the University of Michigan. Now, the fungus is classified as a potential agroterrorism weapon and causes millions of dollars in damage to ag every single year, plaguing things like wheat, barley, and rice. It also causes liver damage and reproductive defects in humans and in livestock. Now, dealing with the possible threat of Chinese land ownership in the U.S., it's now a top priority in many spots across the country. Texas, for example, taking action now by joining 26 other states that have laws on the books restricting foreign land ownership. And in Texas, the legislature there just passed a bill preventing land ownership by anyone tied to the governments of China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia, and really gives even more latitude than that potentially as well to the governor. Now, Texas is one of many states that has Chinese-owned land next to military bases there, which often raises the question about what is going on, and the state often keeps its eyes on it, trying to figure it all out. Joining us live here on the Hill is Dawn Buckingham. She is the Texas Land Commissioner, with us once again here on the Hill. Thanks for coming in tonight. You're in town?
Yes,
stopping by.
Always good to be in D.C. and be on with you.
Of course. So you have this bill in Texas. Greg Abbott, the governor there, expected to sign it. It goes further by saying, you know what, it's not just China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, as I understand it, but really any sort of area that the governor deems, you know what, we don't want people from these countries buying land. Explain why you're doing this in Texas.
Well, you know, several years ago, we had a high-ranking Chinese general bought a very large piece of property adjacent to an Air Force base, built a landing strip on that land, big enough to land any jet manufactured, i.e. any big military jet, and then built a wind farm and tried to tie into our grid. We realized that that was really a mechanism for destabilizing our grid, really a mechanism in causing problems for our bases, and so we blocked him from being able to tie into the grid. Since then, we've been talking about how to block these foreign nationals from hostile countries from buying Texas land.
You know, it's not your state, but in Arizona, not far away, Katie Hobbs, the governor of there, just rejected a very similar measure. And the worry there from her is that it could be arbitrary enforcement. So what about that argument of, you know what, you might be going after certain individuals from certain countries who maybe shouldn't be?
Well, our bill has protections in it for just that reason. You cannot be living in the United States. You can't be a resident. You have to be a foreign national from one of these countries listed on the list for 3 years. You have to not be living in the United States, and it has to be real property. It has to be mining, agriculture. There has to be a significant amount of commercial value to it, something like that.
Tell me about Fusarium graminearum. I believe, did I say it right?
I think you did.
Okay, because this is the big story from the FBI today about this this Chinese couple over at, one of them is a scholar at the University of Michigan, arrested for basically agricultural terrorism. You've dealt with some of this in Texas, or at least know about it. What's the issue here? What's the worry?
Well, the issue is it can not only cause irreparable damage to crops, it hurts humans and animals alike. reproductive issues, liver failure, things like that. There is no doubt. I believe that they have evidence that it was coordinated, that the intent was to smuggle it in, clone it, and use it as a bioterrorism. This is unacceptable. You know, the Chinese passed, I believe it was the Intelligence Act back in 1917, that basically said any one of their citizens has the absolute duty to pursue and carry out the Communist Chinese Party's plan with regard to espionage and everything else. And so citizens are bound by their government.
When you say bioterrorism, that doesn't, it sounds scary, right?
It is scary.
And do you think that this is just sort of a one-off?
No, I think they're coming after us. I think China has a 100-year plan for world domination. They've printed it in books from decades ago. I think it's the tail end of their plan. I think bringing in a weaponized fungus that could decimate crops and cause harm to humans as well as livestock is a real threat.
We saw, you probably haven't been asked about Ukraine much, but we saw the drones that Ukraine used in Russia to take down the bridge in Crimea. And the reason why I bring it up is because now there's this conversation about drones, and here stateside in the homeland, how open we are maybe to sort of this new age warfare, new age technology. The head of the Army was testifying about drones up on Capitol Hill today. I want to play for you what he said, and then I'll get your reaction on the other side.
At a cost of a mere tens of thousands of dollars, Ukraine inflicted billions in damage, and drones are but one example of a broader shift. The Army needs to keep pace. In my first 3 months as Secretary General, George and I have been immersed in understanding why the Army has been slow to innovate.
The reason why I ask you about this, Dawn, is because as the land commissioner there and sort of thinking about who owns these lands and what they may or may not do with it, have you ever broached this idea? Because now it's becoming a real topic and a real conversation of, could someone else put a drone on their land and use it against the homeland here?
You know, it's very interesting as we actually have pretty strict laws in Texas about drones. If you cross your own property line, it's a criminal offense. If you interrupt a hunt, it's actually a felony. So we actually have several laws on
bad actors don't care about laws. You know that.
That is true.
So I guess the question is, do you think this becomes a conversation going forward, sort of at the state level here, and when you think about what's going on there?
I think it absolutely is.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. Dawn Buckingham is the land commissioner in the state of Texas. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Good to be
here on the Hill. Appreciate it. Still to come tonight. A familiar face from the Biden era back in the headlines. You remember her? Karine Jean-Pierre announcing really a couple things today. One, she's leaving the Democratic Party, but two, she's got something else on the horizon as well. What is this all about as the questions around the past president continue? You're watching The Hill here on NewsNation.
Tonight on NewsNation.
My brothers and sisters, let's get after it.
A special 2-hour edition of Cuomo, Bill O'Reilly, Stephen A. Smith taking your calls and questions. A special 2-hour edition of Cuomo tonight at 8, 7 Central, only on NewsNation.
On NewsNation, many know Karine Jean-Pierre as one of the main faces of Joe Biden's presidential administration. After all, it's one of the big reasons why you have a White House press secretary. Their job description is essentially to deliver the president of the United States message to the media, to the American people, to the world. And that was Jean-Pierre's job for basically the final 2.5 years of the Biden presidency. Moments from her that included famous exchanges like this.
I could speak for the president, and he said he would not pardon his son.
Would the president pardon or commute his son if he's convicted?
So I've answered this question before. It was asked of me not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I was very clear, and I said no. 64% of the American people agree with the pardon.
All right, so that was obviously just one issue, right? But Jean-Pierre today, back in the news, announced that she is no longer a Democrat. Jean-Pierre releasing a new book as well, which describes the Biden White House as quote-unquote broken, or at least announcing the new book. She now describes herself as an independent and chastises the two-party system, at least according to sort of the preview of the book. Now, it raises all sorts of questions, as you might imagine, not limited to, is the move part of a trend? Or is she trying to cash out and distance herself from a growing mess? Now, if you wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt here, here's part of the argument. There is an upward trend in those who just loathe predictable partisan politics. After all, we hope that's one reason why you watch this show. In 2024, for example, Gallup reported that those who identify as independents hit 43%. which had skyrocketed 12 points in just 2 decades when it was 31% in 2024. But the timing here in many ways beyond notable. For example, today alone, the Congressman James Comer, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, sent out letters again seeking interviews with 5 of the top advisors around President Biden as the questions mount about the former president's mental capacities and who might have known what when, along with whatever they might have witnessed. Full panel here with me now. Mark Short, former chief of staff to the Vice President Mike Pence. Lindsey Granger, NewsNation contributor. Elizabeth Pipko was a former spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. Kurt Bardella, NewsNation contributor, Democratic strategist. Hello to you all. Thanks for being here. Anyone have an idea who I'm going to start with? This guy, because you did it. You did something similar, but different.
Yes.
Explain and sort of your lens on this.
In early 2016,
yes,
I left the Republican Party.
Okay.
I left because I felt that the party was going to go into a direction that did not align with the values that made me a Republican in the first place, mainly the belief that we should have checks and balances in our government, that we should have an immigration system that welcomes others in a controlled, responsible way. The party changed. I always say, I didn't leave the Republican Party. The Republican Party left me. And we see every day now how the party of today, as they about to vote on a bill that blows up the deficit even further, has completely changed its course on so many issues. It's another thing to leave a party after it's already happened and you were one of the key components of that, or to write a book saying, I don't like what happened and I had nothing to do with it, so don't blame me.
So what should she have done then? Because from your vantage point, the difference is she had one of the most prominent jobs in politics and television of any kind.
If you know something is wrong or broken and you have a front row seat to it, stand up in real time and say so. I have no tolerance, and this is true for both sides of the aisle. If you were part of Trump 1 and at the end of it you went out there and wrote a tell-all saying how horrible it was, but you wrote shotgun the entire time, shut up. If you wrote shotgun to the Biden presidency and you were out now saying it was a disaster, everyone hated each other, nobody knew what was going on, you were there. You were one of the most visible people of this presidency. You could have stood up in real time saying, American people need to know this right now.
Here's part of it, Lindsey. It was her job to go up to the microphone.
Right.
Right? It was not her job exactly 3 months ago to the day to show up on The View and talk about Democrats as we, and then say, quote, I don't want to rehash the past. I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, you and I talked about this earlier. My first reaction was immediately, oh no, she's trying to sell a book. But I had some time to think about it. I actually really commend her decision. You know why? Because I went back and watched that interview on The View.
I did too, yeah.
And she said she wants to know, or she thinks that the Republicans have some questions to ask themselves. Are they the party that's not going to challenge Trump and and continue to allow him to skip over Congress on real issues? And are Democrats the party that are not going to say, who are we? Where is the imminent change that we're making after this terrible election loss? What are the plans forward? And I think after 5 months into Trump's presidency, to not see much change or not have a party that's emerging a new leader, after years of complaining of what Trump did the first time, maybe she is amongst those young people that are also ready for something different and don't want to be blindly allegiant to a party that's not serving them in any real way. And I think that we should start opening up the conversation to where real Americans stand, because I don't think Americans are on the fringes of either party. I think most Americans are center left or center right. And I think she's representing the people that are allowed to have freedom of thought in these moments and say, hey, I don't like the way Trump behaves, but I also don't like what Democrats presented to me as an alternative.
You told me, Mark, you were recently with her at an event, and you were speaking together at an event. How do you view all this?
Look, I feel like there's a lot of senior Biden advisors who need to answer the American people about hiding the president's physical and mental inabilities to be president of the United States. Having said that, I think that Kareem's a sincere person. I don't agree with her on almost any issue, but we should remember that Kareem was an activist for LGBT activities. She was an activist for MoveOn.org long before she became a partisan Democrat. And so I don't question her sincerity on this.
I also don't question her sincerity. However, I will say, Mark, you just brought up having to answer for the last administration. There's 2 issues. There's A, the collapse of the Democrat Party, the loss of, communication styles and messaging, the loss of black voters, Hispanic voters, the loss to Donald Trump. And B, there's the question of standing up and actually telling people the truth when you saw that Joe Biden was incapable of continuing the job that he had in the Oval Office. And maybe she won't have to answer as much for Democrats, but she cannot separate herself from being the person that was the face of the administration and lied for 2.5 years about Joe Biden doing his job.
The one question that I have is, if she had left the administration, and was able to follow in the suit of Jen Psaki and had gotten a show at a certain network, would we be having this conversation today?
But perhaps I'm thinking that perhaps she saw what happened to Joe Biden, and maybe there's a part of her that still doesn't think that was the right solution. And so that's a whole different conversation to then continue to double down and defend him. Maybe she doesn't agree with the cognitive loss accusations. Maybe she thinks that that recent book is not acceptable.
So that's coming, though, because here are the five Biden former Biden staffers called on by James Comer. Ron Klain, White House Chief of Staff. Anita Dunn, Senior Communications Advisor. Mike Donnellan, Advisor. Bruce Reed, Deputy Chief of Staff. Steve Ricchetti, Advisor. People are going to start to know those faces and know those names, Lindsay. They weren't household names, but that's coming, right?
Right. Because people are looking for real answers. And I think she should be in that conversation, but we don't know all the details of the book. And it doesn't seem like another tell-all about how bad Biden was and how much of a poor choice he was to continue running. And while she might have to atone for being part of that decision, she still can say, I believe that Joe Biden should have followed this through, whether you agree with her or not. That could be her stance. And then she's really just falling in line with what she truly believed.
So Charlemagne the God had Eric Swalwell on, Congressman, Democrat, California, the other day. Charlemagne the God hosts one of the biggest talk radio shows in the country. Here's what he asked him, quote, or roll it.
Why should we ever trust the Democratic Party after they lied to us so long about President Biden? And I'm big on this because I just read the original Senate. I'm just like, I don't see, I think that Democrats have tried every strategy except for two things, honesty and courage.
Well, I mean, Swalwell was lied to the American people about sleeping with Chinese spies. Is that the person we should be talking to?
Come on.
I mean, come on, seriously. Is that really the best person?
I think the reason why I played that is because that's the question that is going to be put before Democrats going forward, is about honesty and about courage.
Right, and look, for me as a Republican, I want the party to succeed, but I want America to succeed first. We need two strong parties. If anything can make the Democrats shape up, it might be this prominent
Do we need
phase.
two strong parties?
We do.
Because I think the American...
While we have a two-party system, we need two strong functioning parties.
How do you answer that? If you were sitting there in that seat, you answer it how?
I think I tell the truth. I mean, Eric actually had an anecdote that was in, I think, the Tapper book about having this interaction with the president at one of the public events they had, might have been like the Easter egg roll or whatever, and he thought that, he doesn't really have it. So I think you have to own it. You have to go. I think if I'm a Democrat that defended Biden and now is like kind of looking foolish, I go, you know what? On any day, I will take a cognitive decline to Joe Biden over what we have with Donald Trump and move on. That's the answer I'd give.
I mean, Democrats had an old coalition of working class Americans, and they kind of left them starting in the 1970s when they started pursuing this professional college educated class. And so once you start losing them in the conversation and then not telling the truth, you're no longer the trusted party. So you have to have a conversation that's actually like, hey, Trump was so bad. We just wanted anybody to beat him. We know you went for that the first time, and we're sorry that we did it the second time and it didn't work. We dropped the ball. Let's pick up and start again.
I jumped on you, so I'll give you the last word here. Sure.
Look, I mean, I think the American people elected Donald Trump because they wanted to return to the first administration policies. I fear that's not what we're getting, but I think that's why they elected him. And I think that in 2020, in the midterms, reality is that Americans will be looking for what is an alternative to what's in power. Democrats need to figure this out by 2028, less so by 2026.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Still to come tonight here on the Hill. You know the names, Amazon and Meta, right? There were two stories, different but sort of separate, or similar, I guess, that caught my attention over the last 24 hours. I'm going to explain to you why I'm bringing up these two companies tonight, my take on the other side of the break. And coming up on the other side, oh, look at that. There's what is this? The summer soiree. What they used to call this, Mark?
Well, it used to be a congressional...
the congressional picnic, right? Yeah. That's a live look over at the White House. They have a big gathering over there. Elizabeth Vargas will bring you live coverage of that, including if the president speaks here on News Nation. My take, other side of the break. Stay with us here on the Hill. What's that? Welcome back here to the Hill on News Nation. Live look at the White House. There was a big meeting over there at the White House just a little while ago as Republicans are now trying to figure out how to go about passing the big, beautiful bill in the Senate with the backdrop now of Elon Musk torching the bill, saying today, quote unquote, kill the bill. Senator John Thune, the majority leader in the Senate, emerged out of the West Wing after that meeting, said this.
We understand that it's about 51 and 218. So we will work with our House counterparts and with the White House to try and get that issue in a place where we can deliver the votes and get the bill across the finish line.
All right. They're going to have lots of questions on that in the upcoming days as they now have to figure out how to tweak the bill and how to deal with a lot of the noise in the backdrop as well. Time for my take now as we end the show tonight here on the Hill. You know the names, right? Amazon and Meta. They are two of the biggest companies in this country over the last 2 decades or so, let's call it. And there are 2 headlines over the last 24 hours involving both that caught my attention, and they have nothing to do whatsoever with your digital shopping cart or your social media. Amazon today announcing it's investing some $10 billion in North Carolina. Pop up the image. Okay, live look. Forget my take. Who cares what I have to say if he's talking? The President of the United States at the White House right now.